I'm Susan Price, CEO of Firecat Studio. We're a UX user experience consultancy based in San Antonio, Texas. And please introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already. I have the distinct honor and great privilege of welcoming Julie Jensen, my dear friend and former boss. And she is going to introduce a really innovative feedback system that is super important to developing a critique culture on your team, at your organization, or just even when you're giving critique or feedback to anybody. It helps take the sting out, is what I'm finding. I was already a fan, but lately watching Julie go through this a couple of times has been really impactful. Julie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. I'd forgotten our relationship. Just became a friend. So I'm the founder of Rut-Wrecker, which is a small consultancy company really focusing on publishing innovative and mind-altering, if you will, publications. One of them being SQUACK, because I'm also the inventor of this feedback formula. And I'd love to just get started. So I know that you're all kind of on your lunch and you probably don't think you're going to be tasked with doing anything, but I'm going to have 4 things that I want you to do today. And you need to pay attention because these are things that are going to help really you have a kind of an experience that when I first did this, it was very, very interesting and really eye-opening. So sit on your hands, because I know the things that I'm going to ask you to do, you're going to be tempted to do immediately, but you have to kind of hear all of the nuanced things that I'm going to ask you to do. So I'm going to ask you to point your elbows, pretty simple, both of your elbows. I have to only do one. I'm going to ask you to press your palms firmly against a hard surface, both of them. And you're going to press this area against that hard surface. Next, you're going to snap your fingers against that same hard surface. So if you think about your middle finger here, you're going to snap like this against it. Now, let me connect these things for you a little bit. Point your elbows toward the monitor. I can't tell if you guys are doing this or not. I promise it won't hurt. Press your palms firmly against that hard surface, which is essentially your ears. So if you can see this little ear, what you're doing is you're putting your palms right there against your ears, and you should hear an echo or kind of a vacuum, if you will. And then you're going to snap those fingers against the back of your head. And we're going to do this actually for 30 taps. Ready? So what happened? You can type your response in the chat and Susan will help me hear what happened. Hopefully you had a different sense.
Did you feel like you weren't doing it right? Give me some feedback in the chat.
It's kind of hard because you have to really press very hard against your ears. And what's going on, and what when it works, and when you maybe trust it a little bit. I know that some of you don't know who I am. It's like, why is this person asking me to do these things? But when you actually do this, what it does is it takes the kind of the middle of your ear has 3 different bones in it, and those bones vibrate whenever there's a noise. So that siren that you heard 2 weeks ago, the Slack notifications that are going off, the dogs barking, cause each of these bones to vibrate. And when you do this little activity, what you're doing is you're really resetting those little bones and those vibrations. And it should feel a bit more quiet, and it should feel a little bit less disruptive. Like you really have turned off the disruptions that are kind of going off in your own head. And what I'm here to say is that is what helps, that SQUACK helps with as well. So not just this kind of reducing the noise in your own head, but actually reducing some of the friction and the white noise and the disruption that happens between people when you're having a design crit or a feedback session. So I'm sure the question is, what the heck is SQUACK? So let's walk through it. SQUACK stands for different categories of feedback. The first is suggestion, a comment or idea based on opinions or personal experiences. So this is where if you are giving feedback, you're able to express your personal opinion as a suggestion. Make that opinion a bit more actionable. And what I mean by that is you're actually going to take your suggestion and say something along the lines of, I recommend that we or you do this, and then you explain why. And the explanation is really intended to be persuasive and explain why you feel that way. One of the things that's really so frustrating when you're hearing feedback is when someone says, I don't like the color yellow. Well, that's not really helpful to me as the person who created this slide. You're not really telling me what I need to do differently, right? And so if you were giving me that feedback, you might want to say, I don't like the color yellow. I would recommend, my suggestion is change the color yellow to something that has more contrast so that I can read it better. Now I understand what your suggestion is. You're telling me what you really want me to do, and you're explaining why that is an important thing to do. The second category is question. It's an idea that needs clarity or explorations. This is something that's very important to consider. Your type of question has to think about the type of answer that you're expecting. Don't expect anything more or less than the question that you are actually asking. So think through why you're asking this question and what you need to hear coming back out of that question. There's a lot of research that's done around effective precision questioning and how to ask questions more effectively. It's very important to ask those questions, but also if you're the recipient of the feedback, you also need to think about, how do I answer this question? What is that person really wanting me to say? Or what are they really needing the clarity around? If they're asking a yes, no question, you probably need to give a yes or no as the answer. If they're asking who or what, answer those questions that way. And it will help to open the conversation and become more partnering through this. I'll go back just for an example. When I worked at Microsoft, we were very, very strong advocates of precision questioning and answering. And this is where you could actually feel like you were presenting to a group of people, high-level people, and they would drill you with question after question after question. And you kind of felt like you were on trial, if you will. And the design team would typically go in, and we have so many different ideas and so many constraints that we had to look at, so much work that had been done just to get to the point where we were showing our design, that we always wanted to answer maybe the question that wasn't being asked. But when we stepped back and thought about it from who's the person who's asking the question and what are they really wanting to hear, what's the answer, we would stop and not give all of these superfluous information until the time that that superfluous information was more welcomed, because they had the answers to the questions that they were asking first. So think about that. The third one is user signal. And this is one, and well, let me read the definition in case it's too small. It's data, feedback, or research that spurs a compelling suggestion, right? A suggestion that's backed by data, feedback, or research, or an authentic kudo. We'll talk about kudo and giving away a little bit of the formula. This one's a little confusing. It's the one that people kind of wonder the most about. People who are already doing user research kind of wonder why you need to have a separate category for user research. If you're not doing user research, it sounds like, why would we pay attention to what users need and expect? Let me give you a couple of examples and the formula. So essentially, when you're using user signal, you want to describe the known data, the known research, what's going on. And you've already, because you're about to give feedback about it, you've already wondered, it sounds like we're veering from what I had learned or what the research had already told me. And so you're obligated at that point to describe again the user signal and construct a suggestion to improve, right? Don't just make a suggestion, but this is actually the ability to use the data to inform the suggestion. Or if the design or the asset is actually aligning really well, then you should be expecting to see kudos coming from the users. So express that as well, right? Use the user signal as a background for improving or giving thanks and being grateful for the work that's going on as well. An accident. So this is a typo, copy and paste error, a misalignment, a math mistake, something that is really just an accident in the designs. This is one that people really favor because I'll tell you why. It really encourages the person who's giving the feedback to use discretion. There's no reason for you to voice that there's been an accident when you're in, especially if you're in a group of people and you're doing a design review. There's no reason to point out that the header has a misspelled word in it, right? In fact, when I was at Capital One, we'd been squawking for a period of time and we were all sitting around going over our strategic plan. So it wasn't just design assets that we were looking at. We were looking at really anything where we were trying to convey to other people what the plan was. You can imagine a big group, lots of directors and vice presidents, and we've done our reading. And one of the vice presidents says, first thing he says, I noticed that there's a misspelled word in this header. And literally 3 people kind of jumped on him and said, just circle it and give it back to her. We're not going to talk about that. And what that ended up doing, he was really grateful. And then he's like, wow, that was really squawking. People stepped up. They told me that not to talk about accidents. And we were able to get through the document very quickly, less than an hour, and had a great understanding of what improvements the person who wrote it needed to make. Third is critical. Now, this is where your suggestions are things that you want to see, but a critical is a problem that must be resolved because of the potential risk or customer pain, right? There's a business risk that's pending or there's serious customer pain. And what's really interesting about critical is that it's, again, hey, we need to do this, we need to make this change. But instead of just saying it, making it a suggestion and kind of putting it on the back of the designer, instead you actually are also obligated to offer help or guidance or commitment or something, because this is so serious that very definitely needs to be resolved, that you're willing to put your foot into it, right? You're willing to put your back into it and help resolve that particular issue. The last one, as you can predict, is kudos. This is praise or gratitude. And again, the formula here is just to be sincere and specific. Anytime we hear a kudos, it kind of feels good, right? But I had a conversation actually with Susan earlier this week, and she said, you know, it's when somebody says, oh, I loved it, it was great, that really is not very helpful, right? You don't know why they loved it. You don't know what you need to continue doing. It's actually better if you can say, oh, I love it because it helped me accomplish something, or you solved a user problem, right? Be sincere and be very specific at the same time. Often I'm asked, timely, doesn't it need to be timely? And I'll tell you that people who hear kudos, sure, it's great to get a timely kudo when you're in the midst of doing the work or sharing the work. But what's really more important is that it be sincere and specific. So if there's someone that you owe a kudo to because they've done a really good job, don't fret going back and thanking them and praising them for that work, especially if you can tell specifically why it was important or what the impact was. So again, here's the end-to-end full layout of SQUACK with all of the definitions. We're going to use this, and we'll keep pulling it up. One thing that I just kind of want to take a little bit of break and think about. So maybe you're all sitting back having these end of year traditions that you think about, right? Okay, yeah, new year, get to have New Year's resolutions. Maybe your family gets to get together and you get to celebrate things, right? What do we do in my house? What we do in my house, I look so forward to this every year. I love to read the world's worst lists, especially the world's worst website lists. It just is so fun to me to see who ended up on that list and what did they say about it. It's kind of cruel, and I think I like it because none of my websites have ever, as far as I know, ended up on that list, but it's really fun to read. So here's one from actually the last millennial. I'm hoping that no one on the call was responsible for the Disney website in the 1990s, but this was I think it was #1 world's worst list a couple of years ago when they were looking back at websites in the 1990s. Here's what they said. I'm going to read this because it's not that long and maybe the text is a little too small. So, we're drawn to this site's double bottom navigation system, a must-have navigation system for the 1990s websites. On the one hand, you've got your whimsical way of navigation. On the other, you've got your bottom navigation bar, which looks a little odd with its links displayed in that brown maroon color. Disney also seems to have gone all out on fonts in the 90s, employing over 6 different fonts just for the homepage. And yes, we are the logo police. Check out poor Mickey Mouse. So think about this. If you had done this design, what does this critique really tell you? Does it make you feel good? Does it make you feel proud of the work that you've done? What's the general reaction that you or your design team would feel with this? And of course, it's a different context, right? The intent of this writer is to kind of pick and be a little mean, right? Because it's made the world's worst. But maybe SQUACK could help. How could we actually use SQUACK to partner with the design team that did this work? So let's take that first sentence. We're drawn to the site's double bottom navigation system. What is it really trying to say? What's the author of this critique, if you will, wanting to do? What is it that they want the Disney to change? And I would argue of all of those categories, that it's probably a suggestion. They're really looking at, we really need to straighten up some of the navigation and that color as well. So let me now describe for you the suggestion that I would make. Actually, why don't you take a couple minutes here and think about how would you formulate a suggestion that is formulated as do this because of this. What would you be asking them to do, and how would you describe why, right? So again, the formula for a suggestion is do this because of this. And I'm going to be quiet for as long as I can and give you an opportunity to write that suggestion. So I'm going to share mine. If anyone wants to share, maybe we can let them share as well, Susan. But
I'm asking folks to type in the chat. Judy said, reevaluate the need for double navigation. It can be confusing with so many options.
Nice.
And yeah, so, yep.
Okay, so that's great, right? That actually did describe, the recommendation, the suggestion is to reevaluate, right? You're empowering the person who did the design to reevaluate, and you're describing that the navigation actually, why it's confusing. So Mine is lengthy, my suggestion, because I'm trying to be, exemplary in how to do this. But because the page has so many redundant links, and then I describe what they are, let's remove the links in the wave, right? The remaining links, which are not part of the image, will be easier for screen readers to identify, which will enable visually impaired customers to use the site as well. So what I'm trying to do in my suggestion is also kind of infuse some ideas around accessibility, right? Now I went, and my suggestion probably was based upon the fact that I didn't like this whimsical navigation, right? But instead of saying, I don't like that whimsical navigation, I probably wouldn't even use the word whimsical. Whimsical is a pretty positive word. I might have something a little bit more grumpy to say about it. SQUACK actually encourages me to think about what's the action that I would want the user to take, or the designer to take. The second suggestion I think that's being made too is that since some customers may struggle to identify the brown and maroon color as a link, let's take advantage of the industry standard. Links, especially in the 90s, should be underlined with blue text. Here, the reason why behind that suggestion is trying to tie it to an industry standard, really try to take advantage of things that are in the discipline as well. So I'm trying to be persuasive and give the rationale behind why I want that particular change. Let's move on to the second sentence. Disney also seems to have gone all out on fonts in the 90s, employing over 6 different fonts just on the homepage. So again, I think this is probably a suggestion that the author is trying to make. So take a couple minutes and rewrite it. If you were really wanting to partner with that designer and that design team, how would you convey the same information as a suggestion instead of an opinion?
Corinna says, I wonder if all the different fonts will confuse the reader or look busy.
That's great, because you're also giving a kind of a reason why maybe we should limit the number of fonts. So yeah, I like that. Let's go to the one that I've rewritten. So to increase the legibility of the page, that's the reason why. Well, let's eliminate fonts that are difficult to read. Even giving an example of eliminating the table of contents and removing, again, that wave, that navigational wave, right? Will help. I suggest eliminating a couple more fonts for even better legibility. So trying to tie it to what's the reason. I love the idea that it could actually be confusing as well. Maybe it's not just a legibility problem that you're trying to solve, really wanting to solve the legibility and confusion, a little bit different perspective. Okay, so now the last.
Hang on just a sec. Judy says, the different fonts confuse the focus. Determine what is most important and enable focus by using emphasis through font and size.
Ooh,
that's a designer talking there, baby.
That's awesome. I'm going to steal that. That's great. That is exactly right. And you give the rationale behind it, and it feels so much better than just saying, there's too many fonts and you've fallen in love with fonts. Not really actionable and not really a welcome comment. Okay, there's one more sentence. Oops. And yes, we're the logo police. Check out poor Mickey Mouse. So what's going on there? Take a stab at rewriting that to be a little bit more constructive.
Do you mind going back to the ugly Disney? So we can see.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And
yes.
I was confused. Which Mickey are we upset about? Both of them?
It's a good question. I think that probably should be a part of kind of your explanation. To me, I think it's this one. Feels to me like this is really cut off. It looks kind of jagged. So my comment is regarding that particular one.
So there's actually 3 Mickeys on there.
There's a couple of Mickeys on here, and here you can see Mickey's got kind of a point between his ears, and it's gone. Like it doesn't even represent that that whole flavor of Mickey Mouse.
All right, so you guys try writing a suggestion about that.
Any good examples? Any bad examples?
It says, have corporate take a look at all your use of Mickey's likeness.
Love that.
And the images across the page are of varying treatments because there are more than one Mickey logo. It is unclear that this is an official Disney site.
Ooh, that's good.
That sounds like brand police talk right there.
Okay, so I kind of considered this a critical, right? So I actually labeled it as a critical, not just a suggestion. Really trying to harken back to the fact that Disney has spent a ton of time building out that brand. So it is a brand police kind of activity here, but why actually risk degrading what's been out there and is in the industry unless it's an intentional decision to make? You'll notice that I've also included here kind of where you can find the official logos and images. So I'm actually not just saying, go fix this and complaining. I'm actually making a commitment and helping to work with the designer on the solution here as well. So one thing to think about, a lot of times folks will think critical is like, oh no, it's a headache, it's going to take forever to fix. And really don't think about being dismissive of criticals, because sometimes they're just as easily fixed as really just finding the right images. And there's sometimes other solutions that are pretty quick as well. So don't always just assume that a critical is something that's going to be labor intensive to resolve. Now, that was all that was in the world's worst description, and I can't help myself. I had to provide a bit more. So I've got a couple more examples. So I'm using question here, and I want to know what happens when users tap on Where Merry Magic is in the air, log on Sunday for the $5,000 drawing, and what the ABC Sunday night movie is. What I'm trying to understand here in this question of what happens is, to some degree, I'm wanting to know, okay, does the product team really understand what's going on behind there? And if they understand what's going on behind there, is there maybe different, better labels? Is it really clear to the designer why those words and those labels were there? So I'm trying to get at several things by asking the question of what happens. Also trying to convey to the designers that it's important to really think about what's the long-term impact of those things, right? So logging in on Sunday for the $5,000 prize drawing. And when I'm asking what happens, well, okay, is there some service design element here as well, right? I might follow up with additional questions of how do we tell them who won and how do they actually receive that drawing? Have we really thought through everything from an end-to-end perspective? So it's your opportunity to kind of bring in additional scope by asking a question along those lines. Another question that I have is, what did the usability participants expect when they selected the fun link? And how did we deliver on those expectations? And here, really trying to use my questions to reinforce, oh, it's important to conduct usability testing, excuse me. And I, as kind of your reviewer, I'm your stakeholder, am concerned about these things. So again, I'm trying to arm the design team to be able to figure out if these are the right terms, and if it's really clear to a user, what are they going to get if they tap on that fund.
Julie, I have a question.
Okay. Sure.
Is it okay to ask questions you do not know the answer to? Or are you trying to be Atticus Finch where you don't ask questions you don't know the answer?
I think it's absolutely fine to ask questions that you don't have the answer to. There's a lot of value in asking questions. In fact, if you know the answer to the question, then it feels to me as a reviewer that you're trying to trick the person because they don't have as much knowledge as you do. So in that particular case, I tend to, instead of asking a question that I know the answer to, I prefer to actually just state it as a suggestion, and my explanation of why actually reveals what I know about it, or the persuasion of why this is not really the right thing to do. But sometimes, so that's one thing. I prefer not to ask questions that I have the answer to. I'd actually rather arm the design team with information and give myself a little bit of an opportunity in that suggestion to persuade them to do something differently. Because I've got the answer and I've got information that I want to convey to them, rather than asking a question and kind of putting them on the mark to either answer my question now or potentially have to answer it later on. So as I'm a feedback giver, I really also need to consider, am I asking this question because I want an answer? Am I asking this question because I really want to spur some new ideas, or kind of help people to think a little bit differently? And that's all about that question, right? The type of question is equal to the type of answer. And don't expect to hear more or less. Really try to think about, what are you wanting to attain from this question? Now, this is a little bit of a sideways comment, but what SQUACK really does is it makes the person who's giving the feedback accountable for what they want done with their feedback. I've been in so many design critiques with variety of stakeholders who just spew information out and expect the design team to be able to go, okay, I'm going to walk out of this and know exactly what is kind of expected of me and what I need to do. And SQUACK was my solution to that. It was quite a miserable situation at one company where I really felt like the stakeholders were not intentionally trying to demotivate the designers or confuse the designers. They really had the best of intention, but they didn't have a language that they could use to convey to the design team what they really wanted and where they wanted to explore next. And so those questions are intended to help spur that extra investment from a design perspective to get the answers there. And the suggestions, rather than just being an opinion like, I don't like this, really making this stakeholder responsible for turning that around and doing some of the homework so that the design team has much more clarity on what is expected. The thing that I will tell my design team when I'm managing a design team is, I really want them to be the owners of the suggestions. Just because someone has a suggestion doesn't mean that you have to take it. You do have to very much consider the suggestion, but you don't always have to accept it. You have to make sure that you understand it. And many times you have to be able to respond. You have to be able to kind of close the loop, but you own it. And that's what SQUACK really is intending to do. It really helps me do a better job giving feedback to a design team or to anyone who's created an asset that I'm looking at. And also helps people who are hearing the feedback kind of sit back and think about, well, is that a suggestion? And why would that be a suggestion? And actually arms them with an ability to rephrase an opinion into a suggestion as well. So it's really intended when you start talking about the cultural impact that we're trying to have. It's really trying to arm the feedback givers with tools to provide feedback that's actionable, motivational, right? Don't be undermining. And also arm the people who are hearing the feedback with a way of almost, if the people aren't actually following the formula, at least you can reframe that feedback in your own head to figure out, was that really a suggestion? What is it that they're really expecting me to do? If it was just an opinion, guess what? Opinions aren't actionable, right? Suggestions are, because you're actually understanding what the expectation is and why that's the expectation. And you've got some common framework, a common groundwork there to continue forward on. Great question. Boy, that took me off a little bit, but I love that. Keep asking those questions. One thing that I also try to do in giving critique, and why SQUACK actually ends in the letter K, is because I think it's really important to provide those kudos and show that you're grateful for the work that has been done. I'm not always good at that. I had to come up with SQUACK that would just remind me, okay, wait, hold it. What is good about this? In this particular example, I'm also trying to use my kudo, not just to say great job, but also to help the designer understand why this is important. And in this case, it's tying it to, the iconic business model that is driving revenue for Disney, right? I could even take it a little bit further here and try to help amplify why this website is important from the Disney perspective as well. So your kudos are an opportunity to really reinforce and amplify things you want to see in the culture itself. So I've kind of led into some of the cultural benefits, but I'm going to take some time to walk through them. I've seen these in different organizations, and I have stories for kind of each of them. So first off, might be hard for you to read this. Number one is SQUACK is lighthearted, right? One of the first questions I always get asked is, how do you pronounce this? And what I would encourage anyone to do is figure that out. Have that conversation as a team, right? People in the Pacific Northwest say SQUACK, as in the word hawk, right? When I came back down into Texas, it became a squack, and it had that Texas drawl, like quack, squack, right? And now that I'm working with a startup company on the East Coast, they actually say SQUACK, and it just changes, right? But the point is that it's fun. Now, is this made up? Is having fun important? I'll tell you that there's actually research that's been done around senses of humor. So there's actually 4 senses of humor that exist. One is called affiliative, and it actually pokes fun at everyday things in a harmless way to bring folks together. Well, guess what? The word squawk and squawking and you're a squawker is kind of fun. And people generally and genuinely kind of enjoy that. It's a wordplay. And there's tons of puns about birds that you can use when you're talking about squawking. So that's a good sense of humor. Second sense of humor is kind of self-enhancing. It really emphasizes the ability to laugh at yourself, especially when something negative is happening. So people appreciate these 2 forms of humor. They can actually be morale building in an organization, especially if the leaders practice affiliative and self-enhancing senses of humor. Really quickly, I'll just to round it out, I'll mention the other 2 types. There's the self-defeating, which is actually belittling yourself with an underlying kind of poor me attitude. And the aggressive model, which is, of course, kind of bullying and picking on someone else. So those are the 2 that you don't really want. Now, having said that, is building morale an important thing? I'm really pleased to say that there's been research just done this year, June or July, in the social behavior and personality. And they're actually starting to find that supervisors who show a sense of humor can lead to stronger employee engagement, which actually, according to their research, ends up having a positive impact on creative problem solving. So is SQUACK the be all end all for your infusing a sense of humor in your organization? Arguable. But if you can bring it in and really kind of hatch SQUACK across your organization and have people squawking each other's work, in a fun way, in a way that is not intended to be belittling, because the SQUACK formula doesn't allow that. I think it can be very uplifting. It can be fun. And who knows, maybe it actually helps you do a better job, helps your team do a better job at problem solving as well. Time will tell. Secondly, SQUACK enables a non-confrontational and authentic way to speak up. And this is I've seen this where people have been able to speak up in ways that they hadn't expected, especially in situations where they're not the expert. I've had data analysts who have admitted they know nothing about visual design. They don't know, about any of the structures of visual design, but because they have this framework, they feel comfortable that they can express a suggestion, even though they don't have that background. And likewise, I've had designers say, I don't know anything about mathematical algorithms, but I do have some suggestions I could make about some data science activities as well. One more thing that I'll say about this and why it's so important is because when speaking up actually it can be critically important when if you are only looking for consensus and there's a singular focus on pleasing the leadership team, it can be really, or the leader, it can be really detrimental. In fact, Charlene Nemeth has written a book called The Power of Dissent in Life and Business. And she describes the captain of United Airlines flight 173, which was flying from New York through Denver to Portland. And they experienced a landing gear problem, right? The dashboard of the plane said landing gear problem. And he had everyone focus on trying to solve, well, why is there a landing gear problem? What can we do? What are our options? And they were so focused on solving that one problem that they missed the fact that they had a low fuel gauge. And they missed it so much that even when the air traffic controllers contacted them and said, have you considered, the fact that you're running on low fuel? They did nothing. They were so focused on trying to solve this problem for their leader that sadly, the plane actually went down 6 miles outside of Portland, Oregon, at the Portland airport. And that's not to say that if they were squawking, that they would have not experienced that problem. But when you have a sense and an ability to encourage people to bring up other suggestions, things that are maybe not directly associated with what the leader is wanting, but based upon their own expertise, you're going to end up with an ability to hear from your dissenters a little bit more authentically. Okay, so encourages underrepresented folks to speak up and shy folks to participate. I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the example of this is a woman who's been a squawker. She was not on the design team. She was actually a chief of staff. And she was so accustomed to very much working behind the scenes. She was just a master orchestrator. And she was admittedly very introverted, never wanted to have the spotlight, but she made sure that the people who had the spotlight got the information that she needed. And one of the things that she has said is, SQUACK allows me to actually speak louder with a critical without ever having to raise my voice. If I raise a critical, it's critical. We've got to solve it. Now, let's just figure out what the fix is. And she literally uses that to her benefit, to be able to raise those issues that are really most important. And I've heard it from multiple folks, underrepresented and shy. Also kind of mentioned this a little earlier too, focuses on vital feedback rather than careless errors. Again, just think back to that situation where we were all in the room and one person, kind of a high level person, focused on a typo in the header. And we put that to bed and said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to spend the time, everybody in this room, fixing something that's so trivial and so easy to fix, right? I know that there are people who really enjoy finding accidents. And so sometimes when I know that that person exists in a room, I go out of my way to help arm that person with, I really know that you've got this great expertise. You're able to see the pixel imperfections. I'd really appreciate it if you could tell, take a look at this and let's meet afterwards so that you can express that to me individually and I could actually just sit down and fix them, wipe them all out at one time. And then what I'm doing is I'm actually praising, giving kudos for their ability to catch those things and also giving them the opportunity to make sure that they're fixed. Previously, we would spend what felt like hours. Yeah, really talking about accidents that were not important and not very helpful. Untangles real risks from mere worries. This has a lot to do, again, with suggestions versus criticals. I've seen this come up more often than not with the compliance officers who really are trying to protect the company and bringing in these risks. When I've been able to help them kind of untangle their opinions and suggestions from what's really a compliance or legal risk, they actually can do a better job helping us improve the design. What's been really interesting is when I've worked where we've had literally more compliance officers than designers. And when you arm them with suggestion versus critical or compliance issue, you can actually start to hear where maybe in one jurisdiction it's a suggestion and in another it's a critical, right? Because you're arming them with the ability to tell the difference between those. Also, it clarifies the responsibility for solving critical problems. Kind of gave that example of, hey, Mickey Mouse is wrong here. Let me give you the right files. I've worked where the enterprise team has had set standards and guidelines, and we've been expected to follow them, right? And as it turns out, when you bring in suggestions and criticals, and the critical is not necessarily well documented, what we discovered was that when they felt like something was really critical and we didn't understand it, we were committed as partners to figure out how do we change our design to meet this critical need from the enterprise. And what we discovered was that a lot of the feedback that felt daunting and painful were really mere suggestions. They weren't really criticals. And we were able to really untangle and clarify the responsibility for solving them. In this particular case, it would fall back to the enterprise team to document why it was a critical. Just a couple more. Empowers folks up and down and across the team. So what's kind of exciting about this is when you're a leader and you've implemented SQUACK, it's really exciting to hear someone say, hey, Julie or Susan or whatnot, hey, can I SQUACK this for you? And what you've done is, these people may work for you or maybe work for someone else, but they want to give you feedback and it's empowering to them. One of the CEOs I've worked with has said that he finds that it's given the team gumption to kind of stand up and say, hey, I've got a suggestion about this particular decision that you've made, and I want to give you that feedback. Lastly, it also helps to celebrate successes so that you know that what you've done well, and it enables your team to replicate them. This was one that I hadn't really identified until I had some beta Squawker readers who'd been through SQUACK before. And it kind of came out from a couple of different people who said, really appreciated the fact that they would hear kudos that were authentic and sincere so that they knew what they needed to do more of. It wasn't just a pat on the back, but they knew what was important to their leadership team and was important to the business as well. The analogy that I kind of think about here is if you were a coach on a sports team, your athletes need to hear what they're doing well, not just focus on the things that they're not doing well. And in fact, if they can make that forehand even stronger in tennis, right? Maybe they're going to really win Wimbledon because they're able to really focus on the thing that is most important and receive that kudo around that, right? Instead of trying to make up for something else. So it's really an opportunity to celebrate the successes. Oh, I've done a lot of talking, so I'm going to actually turn this over a little bit to you guys. And instead of just asking for any questions, do you have any squawk for me? I don't know that I've kind of set you up this way, that you are the first kind of public people, people who I guess I don't work directly with, who've seen SQUACK. So I would love any SQUACK feedback that you have. So suggestions, questions. Whatnot.
I'm gonna bring you guys on and we'll have the Brady Bunch gallery view here in a minute. But Julie, let them know how they can find out more about SQUACK, if you will.
Oh yeah, so I'll just build this out. So there's a couple of things. You can go to SQUACK Feedback.
Go back one slide.
Oh, okay, sorry, yes, okay. So a couple of things that are coming out. And there's a book that's actually on pre-order. So you can go out to Kindle right now and pre-order the book. It will actually launch on November 1st. I'm working with the publishing company on getting the paper version of it as well. And it's a little behind. That's the first version. And that's really for the UXers, designers, writers, etc. The second version is really for stakeholders and people who are really trying to impact the culture with SQUACK. And the third version that you can't see because I think I'm probably covering it up is for design managers, UX managers as well. So they're all kind of coming out over the next few months. Eventually, when the woman that is doing some of the design work on SQUACKfeedback.com gets out of her gallbladder surgery, that was really untimely this week, you'll be able to go to SQUACKfeedback.com and order the posters, order the kits that you can use to actually point out what your feedback is. I should have done this through the session. Also have a rubber chicken kit that you can squeak and toss that chicken. It's got some ideas for in-person and remote sessions. Bottom line, because I really do want to hear some SQUACK from you guys, is just reach out. I'm Julie at SQUACKfeedback.com. The Brady Bunch.
I'm trying. Some of the folks are somewhere where they don't want to be on.
No worries.
But let's look. Do you have any questions for Julie?
Yeah.
Why don't you stop sharing?
That would be a good idea. Good suggestion.
There we go. So a few brave folks willing to come on and just go ahead and unmute and ask a question if you have one. I have a few of my own, but I'll wait. And if you don't want to come on and you still have a question, just ask it in the chat.
I have a question. For the exercise at the beginning, is that generally given to a room full of people sitting on chairs? So that took me a minute to kind of reorient myself because we're all at home. So I was sitting on something that wasn't a hard chair. I was just wondering about that. But the SQUACK stuff I thought was really interesting, and I wondered it's like workshopping if you're a writer. Sort of the rules of workshopping, but it kind of gives it a structure, which I thought was interesting.
Awesome. I'm so glad that you brought that up because, we definitely need to have certain tools that are done in person. And so the Disney example was really, you can imagine that you'd have different color Post-it notes, and you'd be kind of, if you had a printout of the website, you could actually use the different color Post-it notes and articulate, oh, this is a suggestion, this is a question. Also, you don't have to use different colors of Post-it notes. You can just mark Q for question on any color Post-it note. What I like about using different colors is that you can actually look across the room and see, oh, there's 3 reds associated with a particular design or a particular area. Let's go and talk about those things first. What's really nice is that the teams that I've worked with and have actually augmented their digital tools to include ways of posting different feedback based upon in whatever tool that they're using. So previous team and the team that I'm working with now, we actually go into Figma and have, using the Figma Jam, I've created really different color Post-it notes in there, and I ask people to just go through. In fact, I'm going to conduct a SQUACK session here in a couple of hours. Just go through and add your notes, add your comments, your questions, wherever it is on the design itself. And then once everybody's done, I kind of have a timer and invite people to think individually, kind of like we did in this episode, and then talk about it and go through. And my first job when looking at all of the SQUACK notes is just to make sure that I understand it. I don't anticipate that I'm going to respond to everything right there. I'm going to have to think about things, but the intent is to make sure that everybody is feeling like they've contributed, that they've been able to participate, and that I understand what the feedback is. So I don't know if that actually answered your question or not.
She started off with the,
oh, this. Oh, I went to Disney.
No, but that was interesting too. That was actually, that was actually probably more interesting than my actual question.
and
But
I had this,
yes.
that problem too. The first time Julie did it in our run through, it's like, it was a bit quieter. The second time I pressed a lot harder and I snapped. The snapping was a little bit confusing for me the first time. That I think of snapping like that. So snapping with parallel fingers was kind of a new thing. And then I wasn't sure it was hard enough. And am I trying to vibrate my skull? What is going on here? So maybe we need to tweak on the instructions a little bit.
No, I'd love that feedback. That's really helpful.
The second time I did it in this session, it worked a lot better. And it was like, ooh, it's like a reset, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I'm also listening through headphones.
So you've already got that.
Oh gosh, I never even thought of that.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, how am I supposed to do this? Yeah.
You're not.
Oh,
Not gonna work.
that's brilliant. Duh. That's like, okay, that's like an embarrassing thing that I didn't even think about. So thank you so much for actually raising my attention to that. That's great. I mean,
well, just if you're going to teach it more online, I think in person it would work really well, probably.
Except, okay, so one thing was do this, and then she's still talking to me about what to do next.
Yeah, I tried to slow that down and say, okay, let me get through this all, right? What I will tell you is that the first time that I did that, it was like, oh, wow, like all the distraction is gone. And I haven't done it virtually like this. I've done it in person. And I literally have had people say, wow, I think you just changed my life, because they had so much just distraction in their ears. So I think I'm going to have to really think through how to do that virtually, especially if people have headphones. Really, invite them to potentially listen and then take them out might have been helpful. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
Hey, no problem. I really want to try it now, but I will have to.
Go try it. Stay online.
Yeah,
well, I don't know if you can stay online. Just chat back and let us know how it went.
Okay. Sounds good.
One of my questions is, some of these seem like they're going to stimulate a dialogue, that the purpose of it is almost to stimulate a dialogue rather than have it be a one-off, one-way, just quick feedback.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. It's really to establish the foundation to be able to have that conversation, right? And it really depends. So the other thing is that you need to consider what type of feedback you need based upon the fidelity of the work that you've done, right? There are times early on when you don't really care if there's accidents, right? You always want to hear about criticals if there's something that you're going down a path that's really going to make legal unhappy or something. But I have also a formula and describe how you articulate what type of feedback you need based upon where you are in the life cycle of design. And that's really important. Sometimes you really are welcome and open to suggestions because you're early on and you want to have that dialogue. And later on, when you're closer to the end, you really just need to know if there's accidents or criticals. I've worked with designers who are like, don't give me any kudos. I don't need kudos right now. I'm under so much stress and so much pressure that all I really want to know is there any accidents, typos that I need to take care of? And are there criticals, right? And it changed the dynamic of the room. It was like, okay, we're going to focus on those things, and that's all we're going to focus on.
Cool. And you've introduced this at multiple places, in multiple enterprises. Were there places where it sort of took root more quickly and it permeated better?
Yeah, I think that I'm gonna change your question a little bit. I'm gonna, I think that the thing that I'm confident about speaking up around is how to make it actually more successful, and regardless of what the enterprise is, what the company is. And that's really where you have an introduction to it, where it is nothing to do with anybody's work, much like the Disney critique, right? Like let's introduce you to SQUACK, and let's actually rephrase this feedback. And people get really comfortable with the idea of giving feedback this way. And then what actually helps it to stick around, not just hatching it there, is inserting it into meetings. I have this now every 2 weeks. We do a SQUACK of whatever the design team is working on, and we invite the whole organization. It's a small startup company, but they're used to it, and they're hearing and getting that opportunity. And our chief growth officer recently said, I want to SQUACK all of our ideas for next year. And so we're going to have a SQUACK meeting of going through all of these ideas and giving that feedback in a structured way. So yeah, it really just takes getting it into your system and using it.
Jenya said, I also have witnessed the method in person, and I specifically noted how non-defensive people were. It really creates a great setting for the team. So there's a kudo for you.
Awesome.
If you're interested in this, Julie will be giving an iteration of this talk to UX San Antonio. Sherry, is that next week? Julie?
2 weeks.
2 weeks from now.
14th, I think.
So if you go to uxsanantonio.org, you'll see a link to that, and you can follow Julie in LinkedIn to see. I'm sure she's going to announce it. I'll announce it at Firecat when the book is available and the materials. She's got materials that you can order, and she is a consultant available to teach this method to groups. So
awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this. This was really fantastic. The next Firecat First Friday is going to be Dr. Laura Faulkner sharing a new framework for structuring UX research to make sure that it is actionable and focused where you need it to be to solve both user and business goals. So that will be the first Friday in November. So I hope you guys subscribe and join us for that. I'd love to hear any feedback on the Firecat First Friday, including your ideas for topics that you'd like us to cover. Feedback for Julie, anything goes. So thank you so much, and we will see you soon.